good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to A Mighty Mystery on a Mighty Blaze. It is Tuesday and it is 4 p.m., and this is the place to be, as always, here on A Mighty Blaze for the newest mystery that we are bringing to you today. Let me introduce to you quickly William Kent Krueger's gorgeous, brilliant, heartbreaking Lightning Strike, which is one of the buzziest books of the year. Everyone is talking about this, Kent, and people are reading this and loving this. And I have to say, bring tissues as you read this book. Was it a joy to write?
Oh, I had just a great deal of fun creating this particular story. I always have fun writing, but this one in particular.
Oh, I can't wait to talk to you about it. And I can't wait for readers. You can see my little notes in it. I can't wait for readers to get their own copy of Lightning Strike, which is available right now. It just came out in the past several days. And one lucky commenter today will also win a copy of William Kent Krueger's Lightning Strike, you lucky winner. But you must leave a comment here on A Mighty Blaze before the show is over today. So you have about 40 minutes to do that. So ask Kent a question, just make a comment telling him how much you loved the book or can't wait to read it, or ask about his research or anything you want about Kent, and you will be entered to win a copy of Lightning Strike by Kent Krueger. And so, Kent, I have to tell you, so a couple Sundays ago, I opened the New York Times book review, and what do I see but this big, fancy interview with you with a watercolor painting? Is that what that is? What did you think when you saw that?
That it was lovely. That's what I thought. If the artist is watching this, I thought it was lovely.
Okay, so let's talk about the interview, though. I mean, the idea that the New York Times Sunday Book Review chose you for to be the weekly interviewee, that is such a rite of passage. That don't you think that that's such an indication of that success and joy and admiration and respect, don't you think?
Well, you could certainly look at it that way, I suppose. I mean, to be in the New York Times, to be featured in the New York Times, what a remarkable thing to have happen. You know, I have to say honestly that I try to take all of these things in stride and not give anything that comes my way, good or bad, too much weight. I just try to stay balanced. This was a very nice thing to see, and I know that the folks at my publisher have worked for years to try to get something for me in the New York Times, and here it is. Thank you, my team at Atria Books.
That is such a Kent Krueger thing to say. You are so balanced and so generous and so thoughtful about the way you look at the world. And that is something that we can all really learn from. I do think that you're right about not knowing what's good or bad, but sweetheart, this is good. You can just say this is really a good thing. And congratulations on that.
Okay, I will admit this. I cracked open a bottle of champagne the night I saw it.
Okay, there you have it. And I think that's wise and brilliant. I do think it's important, to keep the world in balance, but also when something is wonderful, it's okay to celebrate. Our lives are short and we don't know what's going to happen. And when something absolutely downright good happens, we can say, yes, this is a good thing. And it's not like you haven't worked for it.
Well, yes, this is true, Hank, but we all know wonderful writers out there who work their rear ends off in so many ways to get their books noticed, and it just doesn't happen for them. So when it happens for me, when it happens for you, I think we should just look at it as this wonderful blessing and say, thank you, Lord.
And that is exactly what I say. That is exactly what I say. Let me say before we go on, and you can see you all that Kent and I could talk about this forever, but I need to do the housekeeping here, is that you all know about A Mighty Blaze. You know why you're here. If you are here for the first time to hear about Kent Krueger's Lightning Strike, let me tell you that A Mighty Blaze was started at the beginning of the pandemic, which seems longer and longer ago, by the fabulous powerhouse team of Jenna Blum and Caroline Levitt, to keep us together, to keep keep us thinking about books and talking about books and learning about new books and learning about new authors. And we have been going strong, blazing here for more than a year now. That's the good news and the bad news. And we will continue to do that. And let me formally introduce now Kent Krueger, although so many of you know him already. He was raised in the Cascade Mountains of Oregon, and he briefly attended Stanford University. And here's what his official bio says: before being kicked out for radical activities. And we would love to hear more about that. That was a certain time of our lives, and I lived through that as well. He makes his home in St. Paul, Minnesota, a city he dearly loves. Krueger writes a mystery series set in the North Woods of Minnesota. His protagonist is Cork O'Connor, the former sheriff of Tamarack County and a man of mixed heritage, part Irish and part Ojibwe. His work has received a number of major awards, including the iconic and coveted Edgar Award. His last 9 novels were all New York Times bestsellers. Congratulations. I was with you when you won the Edgar. Do you remember that?
That was a lovely night, yes.
I have a picture of you and me together, and you hadn't won yet, and you just looked like the happiest person I have ever seen in my entire life. And again, that's so Kent, because you hadn't won yet. You were just already happy.
I was just happy to be there. It's a cliche, but just to be nominated was such an honor.
Completely so. Completely so. That was quite a night. And I hope you will look at the comments as we're talking. Amy is saying, just finished it, loved it, like all your books. She says it took a few chapters to remember Cork was a young man. And we'll talk about that in a minute. And don't forget, you can enter to win if you leave a comment like Amy did. You can enter to win a comment of Lightning Strike. So everyone had been waiting for this book, and it's out this month. And the description begins, and then you finish. The description begins: Aurora is a small town nestled in the ancient forest along the shores of Minnesota's Iron Lake. In the summer of 1963, 12-year-old Cork O'Connor stumbles upon the body of a man he revered hanging from a tree in an abandoned logging camp. So we'll go into all of that, of course, but just briefly, how would you describe the rest of the story?
It is the story of conflict that arises when two cultures perceive an event from different perspectives. Cork O'Connor is a kid of mixed heritage. He has a foot in his white heritage, his Irish traditions, and a foot in his Ojibwe heritage, his Ojibwe traditions. And throughout the course of this story, as the truth of that death attempts to be found, Cork finds himself caught between those two conflicting cultures. And one of the things that I wanted to write about in this is how, depending upon the perspective that you are seeing a thing from, the truth of it can look entirely different.
Exactly. I love that there are so many conflicts and so many connections in this book. The balance of two cultures, the balance of small town, large town, the balance of fathers and sons, of spirit and belief, of legacy, all those kinds of themes come into this. The cool part of one of the many cool parts about this is that you've written 18. This is the 18th Cork O'Connor mystery, but this is a prequel. So if someone hasn't read any of the other Cork O'Connor mysteries, they can start with this one. Why did you decide to do that? Why was that important to you?
Well, it wasn't necessarily what I set out to do, to write a launching point for readers who are unfamiliar with my work, but it certainly has turned out to be that way. And so a good thing for the series and for me. I actually wrote the prequel at almost the insistence of my agent. She has for years wanted me to write a story about Cork O'Connor when he was young, because so often across the earlier 17 books in the series, I have made reference to events in Cork's early life that significantly influenced him, people in his early life that influenced him. And my agent wanted me to have the opportunity to go more deeply into each of these characters and those important relationships that help shape Cork into the man who occupies center stage in the series. And I just didn't really have a good idea for that until Well, until an Ojibwe friend of mine gave me an idea, and I thought, okay, I can wrap a story around this important thing.
Isn't it so interesting how when you hear a good idea, you know what that is? It's like this moment that blossoms in your brain and soul that you sort of get goosebumps about, oh, this is what I need. What do you think about that?
Do you know? I think, and I hope you believe this as well, that when you accept that you're one of the storytellers, it's like you open a door to yourself, and story ideas start coming in from all directions. So you probably have more story ideas than you will ever have time to write. And so always the question of the moment is, of all of these possibilities, which one gives me the tingles? Which one is one that I know I can live with for most of a year? And when my Ojibwe friend told me about it was actually, he informed me about the Relocation Act of 1956, which so split Native communities across the nation. And I thought, there's something I can write about. There's a beginning for me. And then, of course, the issue is how to construct a compelling mystery around this seed of an idea.
Well, I love that you have the author's note about the Relocation Act at the beginning of the story, just to set the history for readers and let us know, on the basis of what this story takes place. Talk a little bit about, if people don't know, talk a little bit about what that is and why that mattered to you.
Well, the white majority in this nation has been trying since we landed, since our ancestors landed here, to pretty much eradicate the native population. And so many different kinds of attempts have been made. Blankets with smallpox, the reservation system, the Native American boarding school system, all of these, and they didn't succeed. But in the late 1950s, some guys in Washington, D.C., who thought they were pretty smart, decided let's try something else. So they came up with what was called the Relocation Act of 1956. And this was what they proposed. They said to Native families, if you are willing to relocate to an urban area, often very far from your home, we will pay for your transportation, we will pay for your training, and we will we will make sure you are housed and that you have a job. So that was the promise. And many Native communities just were decimated as people who were desperate for jobs, desperate for a different kind of life, left the reservation, left the small towns that they lived in. Many Native communities just disappeared entirely. And then, of course, the truth of it was nothing like it had been promised. And jobs did not materialize. The housing was substandard. Native people found themselves isolated in communities in which no one was native. No one could identify with them, or they could identify with anybody. And so it turned out to be yet another promise that was made that simply was not kept.
And it's such a cynical and destructive idea. And when you think about it from not a white person's perspective, but from the other side of the story, the idea that that the government had this kind of power over this many people, and not only a group, but individuals.
Well, it's always been that way. In my standalone novel, This Tender Land, I talked about the Native American boarding school system. And for almost 100 years, if you were a Native family, Native parent, and the government came to you and said, we're going to take your children away and we're going to cart them off to a boarding school hundreds of miles distant, and you will seldom see them again, or you may never, ever see them again. There was absolutely nothing you could do. The government, it was the law. You had to give the government your children. They have always had this incredible power.
Your book is so full of this conflict of culture. It just takes center stage, so heartbreaking and such an important thing to write about. How did you tackle that, though, and why? That's a little bit of a tightrope to walk, was it?
Well, and I know you've done this too. If there is very often in crime stories a social issue that's significant. There used to be the social novel. That what we call the social novel. Think Charles Dickens. Think Upton Sinclair. But we don't really have the social novel anymore. And I think the crime genre has done a lot to take its place. And so very often in our crime stories these days, you're going to see a significant social issue tackled. Now, the tightrope, as you call it, that we walk is how to create a compelling story without, killing the reader, beating the reader over the head with the point you're trying to make. And that's where the art of what we do comes in, to create a compelling story in which this social issue finds a natural place and a natural way to be expressed, so that the reader is absorbing this along with everything else and not feeling like you're giving them a polemic. And you've done this too, Hank. I know that.
Thank you. And you do it so beautifully in Lightning Strike. You do it so beautifully because you bring us into the point of view of the characters and how they deal with the conflict and how they deal with these two separate worlds. They deal with each other on different levels and with different rules, depending where you are and who you're talking to. A situation is so different for each of the people involved.
You nailed it. If you're going to talk about a social issue, if you want to make people think more deeply about something, create a story that has people in it that they care about.
Mm-hmm.
Because if they care about the people, then they're going to care about whatever the struggle is that's going on with those people. So that's what I try to do. That's what I attempted to do in Lightning Strike. So I created Quark and his family, and I hoped I created them in such a way that readers would really enjoy spending time with Quark and his father and his mother and his grandmother. That Quark's friends, all of these people who are being influenced in one way or another by not just the Relocation Act, but all of the prejudices that have existed about Native American people. And,
well, your character of Quark is such a beloved character. And I read a story recently about how you chose his name, which just brought tears to my eyes. Can you tell us that?
I hope it brought tears of mirth to your eyes, because it's kind of a funny story. So yeah, long before I wrote my first Cork O'Connor novel or had any idea what I wanted to write, I just had in mind the kind of guy I wanted to write about. And in the beginning, this is all I knew about him.
Okay.
I knew that he was going to be the kind of guy who was so resilient that no matter how far life pushed him down, he was going to bob back to the surface. And his name was going to be Cork. Now, I told that to an audience not too long ago, and some smart aleck in the audience said, "Why didn't you just call him Bob?"
I know, I was thinking that. There's always a wise guy,
Yeah.
always a wise guy. But Cork is perfect. And so where did the rest of it come from?
So when I decided I was going to set my work up north, I took a really good look at the North Country of Minnesota and realized you can't tell a true story set up there without including the Ojibwe, the Anishinaabe, as an element of the work, because their influence in northern Minnesota is ubiquitous. It's everywhere and it's powerful. So I decided, okay, I'm going to create the Ojibwe as a part of the stories that I'm going to tell. Then this as a storyteller, as a writer of fiction, what we're always looking for is conflict, because it's conflict that drives great stories. What is it that drives Romeo and Juliet? It's that conflict between those two powerful families, the Capulets and the Montagues, in which our star-crossed lovers find themselves caught. Moby Dick, Ahab and the White Whale, conflict, conflict, conflict. So when I looked up north in Minnesota, I saw conflict in the landscape itself, very rugged. I saw conflict in the kind of weather we have up there. I saw conflict in the cultures that we're trying to live up there together and often not doing a very good job of it. And then when I thought more specifically about the whole issue of conflict, I thought, wouldn't it be interesting to create a character in who he was could mirror that conflict of cultures. So I decided I was going to make Cork a man of mixed heritage. So I knew he was going to have Ojibwe heritage. And then the question for me was, what is his Euro history going to be, his Euro ancestry? Now, in the North Country of Minnesota, if you are Ojibwe and of mixed heritage, you could be Ojibwe Finn, Ojibwe Swede, Ojibwe Slav, Ojibwe German, Ojibwe Russian, Ojibwe Italian, you name it. For a variety of reasons, I decided to make Cork Ojibwe and Irish. And his name very naturally at that point became Corcoran O'Connor. That's the whole evolution there.
It's so perfect. And I never thought about that. He's just so Cork O'Connor to me. And I didn't peel back the layers of what that name might be. And it's so powerful that you make him be in conflict with himself, that his ancestry is in conflict with himself. And he has to choose who he wants to be, which is himself. And it's also this book is also so much about his family and his relationship with his father, about father-son relationships on so many levels, about how we affect each other as father and son, and what the legacy that one has for the other, and the curiosity. And if you don't mind, you readers don't mind, I'm going to read you a tiny bit from the beginning of the book. Well, I'll just get my glasses here so I can possibly read this. Cork himself has just become sheriff. And this is just so Kent Krueger-y. It says at the beginning of the prologue, there was a bench on the sidewalk. This is Cork. There was a bench on the sidewalk, and he sat and allowed himself the indulgence of reverie. Beneath a blue sky and a butter yellow sun, with a cool breeze on his face, the weight of a new badge on his chest, and the responsibilities that came with it resting on his shoulders, he considered a summer long ago when he'd first begun to try to unravel the mystery that had been his father. Oh, I mean, this sets the story up for us of this 12-year-old boy who's just a regular 12-year-old kid, going on camping trips and hiking in the forest and having friends, and coming across this disaster, this domino that falls, that changes his entire life and his relationship with his father. How did that story evolve for you?
Well, I knew that there was going to be a death, and the death was going to be significant to the Native community, and that it was going to spark the conflict between the two cultures up there. The white populace of Tamarack County who see it, it appears that the man has hung himself, has gotten drunk and hung himself. And the white populace simply says that's what Indians do. And the Native population says, no, this is not a man who would do that. There's something more going on here. And Cork's father, who is sheriff, finds himself really struggling to figure out where justice lies in this, what the truth of it is when he's being pressured from both sides, and not just from the outside, but from within his own family. There is conflict everywhere in this story as a result of the two cultures, both outside the O'Connor household and inside the O'Connor household. And this is really where Cork begins for the very first time in his life to understand that he's viewed differently. He becomes aware that summer that people say things and call him names that he has never heard before. They say things about his family and call his mother things that he has never been aware of before. So he is now just beginning to be aware that everything is different for him because of that mixture in his heritage.
I mean, it's such a beautiful coming of age novel, not only coming of age chronologically, but coming of age with his relationship with his family and himself, and also with his spirituality, with his belief. I mean, your books are always so thought-provokingly, spiritually inspirational. And Cork sees and hears something that he's not quite sure he understands. And those moments in the book where his mind begins to open and he begins to become curious about how there's more to the universe than just himself. Talk about writing that a little bit and why that part of the book is so important.
Well, what's interesting in that is that it's in great contrast to his father. Cork's father is sheriff. He's a cop out of Irish cop out of Chicago. And so he sees the world in very concrete terms. And he believes that evidence will always lead you to the logical conclusion, and that only those things that you can assess logically are the things that you should be thinking about. Cork, on the other hand, comes out of the Ojibwe tradition as well as his Irish tradition. And so he understands that that there are people who he's close to and he cares about, and to influence him, who embrace an entirely different way of looking at the world, uh, a vision of the world that has us looking beyond what we see with our eyes or hear with our ears. And so Cork is beginning to open himself to all of those other possibilities that exist out there, while his father is still working so hard to maintain his cop view of everything.
There's a moment when Cork sees something. He's 12 years old. I'll read you this. He and his friend are outside, and it says, "A cloud passed over the sun, and a darkness swept across the boys. At the very edge of his vision, among the shadows of the tall pines on the far side of the clearing, a much greater darkness suddenly arose, and Cork's gut balled into a fist of fear. He spun to grab his friend's arm. 'Geez, Billy, look!' But when the boys turned back together, the sun had reappeared, and the great darkness was gone. 'What?' Billy said. Cork took a moment to gather himself. 'Nothing,' he said. I mean, this is a moment of change for him. And it must have been so powerful for you to write.
Yeah, it must have, huh?
I know this, everybody is silent here listening, but the comments are just pouring in about how evocative this is, and how spiritual it is, and how meaningful it is.
You know what what I try to do at any rate is make sure that I haven't overwritten a scene. I want to make sure that the point is made, and then we move on. And so it's a balancing act of emotionally getting the point across without moving into maudlin prose. And so that's, that scene, when you talk about, must have had a powerful feeling. Well, I wrote that scene many times.
We'll talk a little bit about that. Was it longer, shorter, not there?
It was longer. And it was, in my first belief system, richer. And then I thought, no, let's pull back, because as a writer, you always know that less is more. And also I knew that I was going to have more opportunities to make the point again. And so I didn't want to use up all my ammunition with one shot. So yeah.
And also very wisely, Cork is 12 seeing this. And you perfectly portrayed it as how a 12-year-old would see it. Geez, Billy, not the purple clouds blooming over the horizon and the feeling of the whatever else you wrote. He's 12, and he sees something that he doesn't understand. And his reaction is just perfect about it. And it also lets us know that this boy is going to bloom into something else. This is what your very wise agent, as Paula Mounier is saying, your very wise agent was seeing that you could do, seeing that people would want. Did it change you to delve back into Cork's history like that, to actually write that and put that on the paper and realize what happened between his father and him, and what happened, why their relationship evolved that way?
This was that part of the story, who Cork is, the relationship with his father, all of the emotional relationships that I think are so important to the story were quite easy to write. I just slipped right into Cork and his family at that point. It's very easy for me to get into that. What was hard for me was the construct of the mystery. So how do you create the mystery that is a compelling part of the story and something every reader expects, in such a way that those two, the relationships and the plot, are woven together in a way that the emotion is always there, but that movement toward answers is also a part of it.
Well, and the movement toward answers means that you have to have a question at the beginning, and you're sort of making a contract with the reader in a mystery that there will be an answer at the end, and that you will hear a good story with a character who you care about and a problem that needs to be solved, an important problem. And in this book, it's not only the mystery of the, now our phone is ringing, probably somebody trying to sell me a medic alert or something. Not only the mystery of who is on the phone and who would call during a mighty blaze. Nobody would do that. I'll just wait.
Maybe it's your agent with a movie offer. You never know.
Yeah, I think it probably isn't. But they could. But she said she would call after 5 with all the movie offers. So I don't think this is it. Anyway, the reader you have a contract with the reader. Forgive me for that, you all. You have a contract with the reader that you are going to set up a mystery, that you will solve the mystery. And in this case, though, there's the mystery and the bigger mystery. And that's another thing that I love about Lightning Strike. And let me tell you all watching today that there are about 5 more minutes to put up a comment or a question for Kent, and we will get to your questions in just a moment. So there was just the double mystery in this, the mystery of the relationship and the mystery of what really happened with the body that was found hanging from the tree at the beginning. How do you balance that, the necessary structure of the mystery with your, obviously, no matter what you say, gorgeous writing?
Well, in the beginning, you ask any writer, how do you write? You have those who plot and those who fly by the seat of their pants, the pantsers. I have always plotted out my Cork O'Connor novels significantly before I begin to write them, so that the structure is in place, so I don't have to worry about what happens next. And that's always been a very safe approach for me. I didn't do that with Lightning Strike. And so as I was working through the story, I was trying to figure out, okay, what will go into place next? And the construct, what beam goes next? What fits on top of that? How is this whole thing going to be held up? So I struggled more than I typically do with the plotting, which I got to be honest with you, is the least interesting part of any book.
How so?
Plot's important. I know that's important, but what's more important to me are all of what I think of as the narrative elements, the characters, the setting, the atmosphere, the language. All of those things are far more important to me than the plot. You have to have the plot there, and it's always good if you've got a good, solid, compelling plot. So that's what I was shooting for, was that perfect mixture of all of those narrative elements that I love with the plot that I have to create.
Well, you saw what I read out loud was not plot, but character and moments. And there's a setting part too that I was going to read, but I don't have time to do that. So I want you all to get this book and read Lightning Strike by William Kent Krueger. And we are giving away a copy of this book today. And in about 1 minute, we're going to ask for your questions. So let me ask you one more question before we go. One of the things about your book that I love is that it is, if I can say this, it is Midwestern. There's a way that you write that's pure and true and very straightforward. Do you think there's a Midwestern voice?
I think I said this in my Times interview. I think there is. I think a case can be made that there is a Midwest voice in literature. It's a very spare voice, as you point out, but it's a very eloquent voice. And it rises, I believe, significantly out of our understanding of our connection with the land we occupy here. In the Midwest, we take great pride in believing that we have shaped the land. We are shaping the land. But in truth, the land has shaped us. The land continues to shape us. And so I do have a consciously Midwestern approach to my work. I try to have a very honest voice, but a very eloquent voice.
And I'm from Indiana, so I connect with you. I connect with you on this. And I do think that the Midwestern setting, how vulnerable people are and how violent the weather can be and how changeable the weather can be. We used to go outside in the summers and watch the sky turn green.
Absolutely.
And you feel that. And Paula Munier is saying the land has shaped us indeed. And, Paula lives in New Hampshire and she has a different kind of life. Now here in Boston, I have a way different kind of life. But I remember being a reporter in Indiana in an ice storm out on the highway where there was nothing and no one, and it might have well been filmed in black and white. because it was just so bleak. And that is only the Midwest. And you portray that, and the trees and the hills and the forests and the creatures so beautifully in Lightning Strike. And look at that gorgeous tree.
You know, if you read a Midwestern novel, a true Midwestern novel, the landscape is going to be a significant character in the story. The weather is often a significant character in this story. I mean, we are so influenced and affected by our natural surroundings that it has to play a huge part in any story you create here.
So I'm looking down here because now you're just making me read this. You're just making me read this setting part. Cork was quickly outside town and cycling his way along the gravel road that paralleled Iron Lake itself. The vast blue sparkle of water came in bursts between the birch and aspen lining the shore. To Cork's left rose rugged hills covered in a mix of evergreen and hardwood, stretching east more than 60 miles to Lake Superior. This was the great North Woods, the country he'd known since birth, and he felt the pulse of its life in the same way he felt the beat of his own heart. And there you have the essence.
Can that guy write or what?
Can that guy write or what? Absolutely. My very next words. Can that guy answer questions or what? We'd like to take some questions from all of you listening to this interview today. So if you have questions, now is the time to. Brenda's saying, Jonathan, answer the phone. That's so funny. Margaret is saying, has any book you read as a child influenced your own novels?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. So here's a story I like telling when I do library events. When I was growing up, my father was a high school English teacher, but that didn't mean I was reading the literature I ought to read. And so I was really fond of comic books, enormously fond of comic books. But when I was 12 years old and a Boy Scout, I was going to work on my reading merit badge, which meant that I had to volunteer at the library. And I did that. And while I was volunteering at my little hometown library, the librarian came up to me and she asked me a very librarian-esque question. She said, Kent, what do you like to read? Well, I like to read comic books, as I said, but I didn't want to tell her that. And, but finally I fessed up and she said, have you ever read The Count of Monte Cristo? Yeah, Hank, that was the first book that opened my eyes to the grandeur of a story, how you can be completely swept away by an adventure, caught up in it, and just can't wait to get back to that story. And that same librarian turned me on to H.G. Wells and Jules Verne and Arthur Conan Doyle and Jack London and Robert Louis Stevenson and those guys who wrote adventure stories that if you look at my work, you can see there's a thread of adventure that runs through almost every book I've written. So absolutely, there are books from my childhood that continue to influence me.
Did you always want to be a writer?
Oh, always. Oh. Yeah.
What was the first thing you ever wrote?
I wrote a short story in the third grade called The Walking Dictionary. I told you my father was a high school English teacher. When I was a kid, he was always storming around the house, ranting something like, nobody uses dictionaries enough. Nobody uses dictionaries enough. So in the third grade, I wrote a short story called The Walking Dictionary, which was in fact about a dictionary that didn't think it was being used enough. It magically sprouted legs so that it could toddle off into the world and go to the people that needed it. My third grade teacher went gaga over that story. My folks oohed and awed over that story. I swear to you, Hank, in the third grade, I knew I was destined to be a writer.
Oh, that's a great story. That's quite wonderful. That's really reassuring. Who else has a question? Anyone else before we go? Anissa's saying, I believe this guy can write for sure, and hurrah for librarians. Sylvia's saying, what feedback do you receive from native readers?
That's really an excellent question, particularly in the environment right now where cultural appropriation is a huge topic of conversation. I have, fortunately, those native readers who have bothered to contact me have been universally kind in their response to my work, complimenting me on how sensitive I am to the Ojibwe culture, and I really appreciate that. I got an email not too long ago that went something like this: Dear Mr. Krueger, I am the tribal librarian on the Lance Reservation that's in the UP of Michigan. She said, when any of our tribal members come in and they're not sure what they want to read, I recommend your work because for a white guy, you do a good job.
There you go. There is your epitaph. That is just great. For a white guy, you do a good job. How did you do the research? I mean, the research feels so personal to me that it comes from human beings and not from books.
Well, I talk a lot to my friends in the Ojibwe community. The friend who really turned me on to the truth of the Relocation Act has helped me a great deal. So I tap my friends in the Ojibwe community to help me. I do an enormous amount of reading. I have quite a vast library of books about the Ojibwe culture and Native cultures in general that help me out a good deal. I'm always online reading what's going on in Indian country right now, so I kind of try to stay in touch with those kinds of things. So that's how I do it.
It's such a responsibility, isn't it?
Well, yes, and sometimes it feels like an onerous responsibility to make sure that you get things right. But if you don't get things right, you know this, Hank, you hear about it from readers.
I have to tell you that once I had a, this is not as a major as a mistake that one could make, but at one point I had a person leave a sandwich on the counter of his desk and came back later, and he decided not to eat it because he didn't want to eat his turkey sandwich because the mayonnaise would have gone bad. And I got an email from a person saying, it's not the mayonnaise that would have gone bad, it was the turkey that would have gone bad. So, okay.
Picky.
I thought, it's the person thought it was the mayonnaise. It's fiction, whatever. So, Kent Krueger, thank you so much for being.
I've had a delightful time, Hank. Thank you.
My pleasure. You all, I know that it is irresistible. I hope it sounds irresistible to you. It is such an amazing book. The winner of Lightning Strike is Sylvia Chipka Buonani. Congratulations, Sylvia. I know that you are such a fan of A Mighty Blaze, and we are so pleased that you won, Sylvia, here today. And Kent, I will be sending her a copy of Lightning Strike. Wonderful. You are marvelous. Congratulations on everything.
This is a fun Zoom, but Hank, I can't wait for the day when we're in person and we can give each other a hug again. That is much to be wished, devoutly to be wished, I have to say, for all of us. Kent, thank you. Let me quickly say to all of you here on A Mighty Mystery, next Tuesday at 4:00, look what we have. Never Saw Me Coming by Vera Kurian. Have you heard of this book? It's incredible. It's a debut thriller about a group of college students brought to campus for a special research project. And what makes them special is they are all psychopaths. So welcome to freshman year. Welcome to freshman year. What a hook. So we are grateful to you, Kent, for being with us this afternoon. We are grateful to you all for being with us this afternoon and hearing about the marvelous Lightning Strike by Kent Krueger. So we will see you next Tuesday. And until then, stay safe and keep